The chains were the first thing Amelia Bones noticed, as they always were. They lay slack across the stone arms of the chair at the center of courtroom 10, iron, old, green-black with age. And they were not moving. The boy in the chair sat very straight, his hands in his lap, and the chains had not found him worth binding. That was because of Dumbledore, who stood just inside the door to the left gallery, silver-haired and silver-bearded, and entirely too calm in his elaborate summer robes. He had arrived 4 minutes before the hearing was called. Cornelius, to Amelia's right, had not yet forgiven him for it. She set that aside. There was work to do. "Hearing convened the 12th of August, 1995, she said, and the chamber quieted the way it always did when she spoke into it, without friction, without ceremony, with the same mechanical readiness that old stonework gives to weight placed upon it. In the matter of Harry James Potter, age 15, of 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, on charges of performing an underage incantation in the presence of a muggle, contrary to Section 13 of the International Statute of Secrecy and contrary to the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery, the accused is present." The boy looked at her. His eyes were very green. She hadn't expected that. And there was a scar at his hairline, a pale, irregular seam against his forehead that caught the torchlight from the wall sconces and gave his face a quality of something marked, something designated. He was thin and dressed in clothes that were slightly too large for him. She noted it the way she noted everything in this room. Once, completely, without commentary. Cornelius shuffled the parchment to his left. To Amelia's right sat Cornelius, and beyond him Dolores Umbridge, who was very still in the way she was always very still when something pleased her. The plum-robed Wizengamot members in the tiered galleries above had the restless, unhurried quality of an audience that expected the business to be brief. The charges were read. The date, the location, the spell. The presence of Dudley Dursley, age 15, muggle, cousin of the accused, in the underpass at Magnolia Crescent, Little Whinging, on the evening of the 2nd of August. The declaration of the accused that he had cast the Patronus charm in response to the arrival of 2 Dementors, which he had encountered at approximately 9 o'clock, and which had begun to administer the kiss to his companion. 2 Dementors. Amelia had marked that in the file that morning. 2 in a muggle suburb, in the presence of a muggle child, without any authorization she could trace. She had noted it at 7:45 and had not stopped noting it. She called the witness. The woman who took the stand was small and grey-haired, with the kind of rumpled, inconsequential look that Amelia had spent enough years in law enforcement to recognize as either genuine or very well practiced. Arabella Figg, Squib, resident of Wisteria Walk, Little Whinging, for 14 years. She testified to the Dementors' presence, their cold, the way the light had contracted around them, the feeling in the air, and to the boy casting the Patronus. A stag, she said, clear as anything, silver and bright, and it had driven them off. Amelia let her speak without interrupting. She watched the chamber while Figg talked, the gallery to her left, the plum-robed members, and Dumbledore standing apart from them all with his hands folded at his waist and a stillness about him that she had decided was entirely deliberate. "He produced a Patronus," Amelia said, when Figg finished. She had not meant it as a question, precisely, but the words came out with a lift at the end of them. "A corporeal Patronus?" "A stag," said Arabella Figg, "clear as I'm standing here." Amelia looked at the boy in the chair. He was watching her the way animals watch before deciding whether to bolt, very still, measuring. 15, and he had cast a fully formed corporeal Patronus in the face of 2 Dementors in the dark of an underpass. She wrote nothing down. She did not need to. The Wizengamot voted. The acquittal carried, the Count declared, the charges dismissed, on the grounds that the attack had constituted a genuine threat to the life of the accused, and that the casting of the Patronus charm had been lawful magical self-defense in the circumstances as described. The voice of the Count reached the back gallery, and the word cleared was spoken once into the domed ceiling of courtroom 10, and settled there. Harry Potter closed his eyes for one breath. When he opened them, the relief was already pulling back behind something more careful, that particular economy of a person who had learned not to let relief run very far. Across the gallery, Albus Dumbledore turned toward the door. Robes were shifting. Cornelius was beginning to rise. "Mrs. Figg," Amelia said. Her voice was not raised. It did not need to be. The gallery stopped. "Please remain seated." Cornelius settled back. The parchment in his hand gave a dry creak of protest. Dolores Umbridge, to his right, was entirely motionless. Amelia turned her full attention to the witness. "You said you were placed in Privet Drive to watch this boy." She paused. The word "placed" was in the transcript. She repeated it with the same deliberate evenness she used for every word that carried weight. "By whom? And for how long?" Arabella Figg opened her mouth, and then glanced, briefly, involuntarily, at Albus Dumbledore. It was the look of a woman confirming, with a single motion of the eyes, that she was still permitted to say the thing she had already decided to say. Amelia filed it. "Dumbledore," Figg said, "since before Harry could walk, since he arrived in Privet Drive, before he was old enough for Hogwarts, before any of it." The gallery did not erupt. In Amelia's experience, it never did. Shock of that particular kind moved through a formal chamber, the way cold moves through stone, slow, invisible on the surface, arriving in the body before the mind has named it. She felt it reach her own hands, and made them still. She did not look at Dumbledore immediately. She looked at the boy. Harry Potter's face was doing something complicated and contained. Not surprise, quite. He had known a woman on his street was watching him. Figg had already confirmed that in her testimony. But something deeper than surprise, the particular quality of a person hearing a fact that has occupied the room with them their entire life, finally spoken aloud by someone with the authority to speak it into a record. It was not relief. It was closer to recognition. She turned, then, to Albus Dumbledore. He was looking at her already. His expression was composed in the way that extraordinary preparation produces composure. Steady, unhurried, not defensive. The long silver beard lay still against his robes. His blue eyes behind the half-moon spectacles, perched on a crooked nose that gave his face its single note of imperfection, were entirely level. He did not look guilty. He looked as though he had considered this moment and arranged his response to it well before it arrived. That, Amelia thought, was precisely the kind of information she needed. She picked up her quill. "This hearing is not yet adjourned." Her voice carried into the full chamber without effort. "I am placing on formal record that the proceedings today have revealed the existence of a private welfare arrangement for a ministry-registered magical minor, Harry James Potter, which has operated without the knowledge or oversight of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement for a period that Mrs. Figg's testimony indicates may extend to the entirety of the minor's life. I am accordingly issuing deposition notices to Albus Dumbledore, to Arabella Figg, and to any individual or organization that assigned surveillance duties over this minor during said period. These notices will be served through lawful ministry channels." Cornelius Fudge said, "Amelia," quietly, with the precise tone of a man who expected that to be sufficient. "Your objection is noted, Minister," she said. She was writing. She did not look up. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement requires no ministerial approval to investigate the welfare of a ministry-registered minor. I am acquainted with the distinction. The quality of the silence that followed was one she recognized, the silence of a room understanding, collectively, that the hearing it had assembled to witness was not, after all, the only event that had taken place here today. Harry Potter was escorted out by an aura to the left of the chamber door. She caught him in the corner of her vision as he passed. The untidy dark hair, the round glasses, the particular quality of posture that teenagers develop when they are trying to appear as though they understand what is happening around them. He looked back over his shoulder once. Not at Dumbledore, at her. She was already writing. The hearing had ended. That was the thing Sirius kept returning to, across the long evening of the 12th. The hearing had ended, and Harry had come home acquitted, and Sirius was not certain he had ever wanted so badly to celebrate something that Harry would not let him celebrate. Harry ate his dinner without comment. He answered questions when they were put to him. Yes, fine. Yes, cleared. No, he didn't want more. And then he said he was tired, which was obviously true, and went upstairs. Sirius watched him go. He had last seen Harry at the end of July, flushed and thin and holding his trunk with the grim efficiency of someone who has learned to pack quickly. The version that went up the stairs now was the same person, and not. Something behind the eyes had shifted position. He said as much to Lupin, who was washing up at the sink with the particular efficiency of someone who has learned to keep his hands busy when he does not want to look directly at a problem. "He's processing," Lupin said. "He should be celebrating." Those aren't mutually exclusive. Sirius found this less helpful than Lupin seemed to intend it. The owls arrived the following morning. Molly was making porridge when they came through the kitchen window in a sequence, 1, 2, 3, and landed on various sections of the table with the indifferent authority of official post. Fred and George immediately began constructing a theory about how the ministry had found them, which Molly ended by taking all 3 letters herself, reading the names on the fronts, and handing them out with the brisk, maternal economy of someone for whom other people's crises are simply logistics. Each envelope bore the same seal. Each letter was signed by the same name, Amelia Susan Bones, Head, Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Each one compelled its recipient to appear and testify in the matter of Harry James Potter, minor, and the arrangement under which said minor had been placed under private monitoring at 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, from 1st November 1981 to the present. Lupin read his twice, standing by the window with the morning light coming in, flat and grey behind him. His face gave nothing away. Sirius had known Remus Lupin for 21 years, and could generally read what was happening behind that face. But this morning, the processing was too quick and too deep. Arthur read his once, folded it precisely along its original crease, and put it in his breast pocket. He said nothing. He looked at his porridge. Sirius did not receive a letter. He was aware of this. There was an order meeting that evening, not the full gathering, but the core of what remained at Grimmauld Place. Dumbledore came through the flue, which meant his face appeared in the kitchen fireplace at 7:30, silver-haired and dust-tinged, and entirely at ease, as if speaking from inside a stone wall was a perfectly ordinary way to conduct a meeting. Sirius had not entirely decided whether this was more or less disconcerting than his physical presence. At least when Dumbledore was in the room, you could watch his hands. Moody sat in the corner with his magical eye on the ceiling. Tonks had pink hair tonight, which meant she was working to appear cheerful, and Sirius had learned over the summer that this was not always the same thing as feeling it. Arthur sat across the table with his hands folded, and the look of a man who has already arrived at a decision and is waiting for the correct moment to name it. Dumbledore explained from the fire, with unhurried precision. The subpoenas were legal, within Amelia Bones's authority as head of the DMLE, and the correct response was to cooperate within a defined scope. Each member of the Order who had received a notice would appear on the designated date, would answer the questions asked of them, and would not volunteer information beyond the direct remit of the question. He would speak with each of them individually before their deposition. "Answer what you are asked," he said. "Nothing more, nothing less. The investigation has a scope. We will respect it." "She will ask about Harry's upbringing," Lupin said. It was not a question. "She will ask about what each of you directly witnessed or were told of Harry's upbringing," Dumbledore said. The distinction was slight and real. Sirius said what he had been holding since approximately 7 o'clock the previous evening, when Harry had gone upstairs without looking at him. "I should be testifying." Nobody spoke. He continued, "I am his godfather. If anyone in this room should be in front of Amelia Bones, explaining what Harry's life has been, it should be me. I know things, Sirius." Lupin's voice was not raised. It never was. "You cannot walk into the ministry. You would be in custody before you reached the deposition room. I know that. And then Harry would have no advocate who holds a legal claim to his care. The investigation would be entangled in your capture, and your case would not be a formal review panel. It would be a recapture. A pause. Do you understand the difference?" "I understand it perfectly. I've been understanding it since 1993. The understanding has not," Sirius said, "improved the situation." Lupin held his gaze and did not argue with that. "Your case," Dumbledore said from the fire, with the particular gentleness he used when he expected you to find something difficult, "is not currently within the scope of the investigation. Amelia Bones is investigating Harry's welfare and the monitoring arrangement from 1981 to the present. Your imprisonment is a distinct legal question." Sirius looked at the fireplace. "Distinct," he said. "At this time." It was not cruel. He recognized this. It was simply true, and Dumbledore deployed it with the particular kindness that made difficult things harder rather than easier. The investigation had borders. Sirius existed outside them. He said nothing else. Arthur unclenched his hands. He set them flat on the table, and he looked at them, and he spoke to the table rather than to the fire. "I'll testify to what I saw. I visited Privet Drive in the summer of '94, and my boys told me what they saw in '92. He did not raise his voice. I won't say less than I know. I want that understood." A quiet fell over the kitchen. "Of course, Arthur," Dumbledore said from the fire. "I would not ask otherwise." Sirius watched Lupin's face during this exchange and saw the careful thing that happened there, the slight adjustment of attention, the internal note being made. Lupin had understood what Sirius had also understood, that Arthur Weasley had just told Dumbledore he would say what he knew, and that Dumbledore's instruction to stay within scope had met Arthur's quiet integrity and not moved it. Whatever Arthur's sons had seen on Privet Drive in the summer of 1992 was going into the record. The bar, the padlock, all of it. Arthur Weasley would still tell the truth. People left by degrees. The kitchen emptied, and then it was quiet, and Lupin was still there, sitting at the table with a mug of tea he had not touched, and the house ticked and groaned around him in the way of old houses that have absorbed a century of other people's grievances. He thought about Amelia Bones's face. He had watched it across the courtroom that morning, Her attention, the way it moved from face to face with a quality of precision that was not cold and not warm, but something more useful than either. He had watched her fix that attention on Arabella Figg and ask her one question about who had placed her on Privet Drive. And he had thought, she's going to ask everyone this. She's going to ask every person in this chain what they knew and what they did with it. He had been not answering a particular question since 1981. Not out loud, not in writing, not even fully to himself. The question was whether he had ever gone to Little Whinging, whether he had ever knocked on the door of a house where a child who called James his father was growing up without James, and asked how that was going. The answer was no. The reasons were numerous, and all of them were true. He was a werewolf, and therefore unemployable for long stretches, and therefore peripatetic. His presence in Harry's life, uninvited, might have caused more confusion than comfort. He had believed, completely and consistently, that Dumbledore's arrangement was sound. Every reason was true. He had been carrying them like valid currency for 14 years. He sat in the kitchen of 12 Grimmauld Place and did not go to bed. The tea went cold. The fire died down to embers. Somewhere upstairs, he was fairly certain, Harry was also not sleeping. Harry had learned, over the years, to read a room through its edges. Not the centre. The centre was where people said things. But the edges. The way Arthur Weasley paused in the doorway of the kitchen before he came in and sat down, every morning for 3 days after the owls arrived. The way Lupin had been carrying the same piece of parchment in his left breast pocket, and had, on each of those mornings, taken it out and put it back without reading it in front of anyone. Harry had watched all of this from the position he had learned to occupy at Grimmauld Place, which was whatever chair sat nearest the door and gave him a clear sight-line to the stairs. It was a habit he had not named until now, which told him something about the habit. He knew the word deposition. He had heard it through the floor above on the evening of the 13th, when the voices had lowered and the kitchen had gone quiet in the particular way it went quiet when adults were discussing something that was not for children. He had sat on the stairs and listened until he could make out enough of the shape of things, not all the words, but the shape. And then he had gone back to his room and sat on his bed and thought about it for a long time. Sirius came to find him on the 15th. He sat down on the end of the bed and looked at the wallpaper for a moment before he looked at Harry, which meant he had rehearsed this and was now throwing out the rehearsal. "There's something you should know," Sirius said. "All right," Harry said. Sirius told him, Amelia Bones had issued formal deposition notices to members of the Order, compelling testimony about what they had known about Harry's life at 4 Privet Drive from 1981 to the present. Lupin had received one. Arthur had received one. There would be formal questioning at the Ministry over the coming weeks. He did not tell Harry that Dumbledore had instructed the Order members to stay within scope, and he did not tell Harry about the meeting or the controlled expression in the flames. His voice was careful. He told Harry the parts that were Harry's to know, and stopped at the parts where his own face started doing something he was visibly working to prevent. Harry listened without interrupting. When Sirius finished, Harry did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "How long did everyone know?" Sirius went still. "About the way things were," Harry said. He kept his voice even. "The Order, Lupin, Dumbledore. How long have people known what it was like?" Sirius's mouth opened. He looked at the wallpaper. "Since before I arrived," Harry said, because he could see the answer in the quality of Sirius's inability to produce one. "Harry, I'm not angry." Harry looked at his own hands. He was not angry, exactly, or not only angry, or not in a way that felt useful to express out loud. What he felt was the particular sensation of a thing he had almost thought many times becoming, very suddenly, a thought he had completed. You did not watch a child for 14 years without someone reading the reports. The reports had to have gone somewhere. He had known this, at some level, for years. He had not followed it to its end point. Now Amelia Bones was following it to its end point for him, and the people who had received deposition notices were people who had been in the room when the decision was made. "I just wanted to know if I was right," Harry said. Sirius said nothing, which was confirmation enough. "Why didn't you take me in?" Harry said. The syntax had flattened out somewhere. It was not quite a question. "After you were cleared. After 3rd year." "I wasn't cleared," Sirius said. "That's the thing. Pettigrew escaped. There was no formal exoneration. I was still a fugitive. If I'd tried to claim legal custody, they would have arrested me on sight, and I would have been back in Azkaban before the week was out." His voice had the quality of someone reporting facts in the register that does not invite sympathy, because he had learned that sympathy was harder to absorb than the facts themselves. "You know this. You knew this in 3rd year." "I knew the outline." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about Azkaban." He was not entirely sure why he was asking. Some part of it was that the story existed differently now than it had at 13, existed in the context of Amelia Bones and deposition notices and the formal record of things that had happened to Harry Potter, and in that context, the 12 years that Sirius had spent in prison without a trial were not just the backstory to a reunion, but a fact of the same order as the padlock and the bars, and Arabella Figg's 14 years of reports. The Ministry had failed Sirius in exactly the way it had been failing Harry, and both failures had been administered by the same arrangement, and Harry had not sat with that until now. Sirius told him. He told him about the Dementors and the cold and the particular quality of time when there is no natural light to mark it. He told him about the accusation, Peter Pettigrew, 12 Muggles, a street in London, and what it felt like to be accused of something in front of people who had trusted you. He told Harry that he had survived by holding on to one thing, knowing he was innocent, which kept the Dementors from taking that specific corner of his mind. He told all of it with the precision of a man describing events he has learned not to feel continuously, because continuous feeling would not be survivable, and he had chosen to survive. Harry listened. He recognized the register. He had used it himself, though for smaller things and in different rooms. What Sirius did not say was this, that in November 1981, in the first weeks of Azkaban, he had told himself that whatever the Dursleys were like, Harry was alive, and Harry was out of the war, and Harry being alive was the only thing that mattered. That this reasoning had made it easier to accept where Dumbledore had placed him. That acceptance had been easier, Sirius now understood, because the alternative, looking clearly at what Harry's life might actually be like in that house, was something he had not been able to do and also keep going. What Harry did not say was this, that he had understood, for most of his life, that he was the kind of person people left. Not unkindly, not cruelly, most of the time, just left. And the understanding had been so complete for so long that he had stopped registering it as something that required an explanation. The conversation ended without either of them saying those things. It ended in a silence that was not comfortable and was not resolution, but had the quality, at least, of a silence between two people who were no longer pretending. "I'm still here," Harry said eventually. He meant it as a fact. He was not sure how to make it sound like one. Sirius looked at him for a moment, with a face Harry could not read entirely. "Yeah," Sirius said. "I know." The night before the train, Harry packed. He was efficient about it. He had always been efficient about packing, which was a necessity of living in a room where your belongings were kept in a locked trunk for most of the year. He put things in their compartments, and he did it without thinking about it much, which was the best way. There was a photograph on the windowsill. His parents, young, his father laughing, and his mother turning toward him with her hand against his arm. They moved in the wizarding way, his mother's head tilting, his father's grip tightening, and they did not know he was watching. Lily Potter, born 30th January 1960, killed for Wilhanottefor, October 1981. He had been 1 year old. She had red hair. He knew this from the photograph, could see the color even in the sepia grain of it, and green eyes that were, everyone told him, exactly his. He picked up the photograph. He did not put it in the trunk. He held it for a moment, and then set it back on the windowsill, and then, after a pause, picked it up again. He left the windowsill empty. He tucked the photograph between his Transfiguration textbook and the inside wall of the trunk, where it would not get bent. He shut the lid. Ron was not nervous in the way Harry got nervous. Harry went pale and quiet and very still, as if stillness might convince whatever was coming that he was not there. Ron went in the opposite direction. He ate 2 bowls of porridge, and then sat at the kitchen table and turned a fork over and over in his hands, and said nothing, which for Ron was approximately the same as pacing. Molly watched him from the stove, with the particular expression she used when she was deciding not to say anything. She was strongly tempted to say. She refilled his tea without being asked. She put a hand on his shoulder when she passed, once, and did not make anything of it. "It's just a room," Fred said from across the table, not looking up from whatever he was doing to a small piece of parchment that kept emitting a faint green spark. "With a ministry official in it," George said. "Asking questions." "Formally. Under caution." "Thank you," Ron said. "That's very helpful." He put the fork down. He picked it up again. Molly removed the fork from his hand by the simple method of replacing it with his mug of tea, and he wrapped both hands around the mug and stared at the surface of it. The thing was, and this was the thing he kept arriving at from different directions during the walk to the ministry and through the atrium and up in the lift with its clanking grill and its interminable slowness, the thing was that he hadn't understood 3 years ago that it was evidence. He had understood that the bars were bad. He had understood that the Dursleys were horrible. He hadn't understood that what he had seen at 4 in the morning through Harry's bedroom window was the kind of thing you were supposed to do something official about. He was 16 now. He understood it now. The deposition room was smaller than he expected. A table, 2 chairs, a window that faced an internal courtyard and let in light without showing anything interesting. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, was already seated when he was shown in, and she stood up briefly to shake his hand, which he had not expected either. She was solidly built, short grey hair, a monocle she wore with the comfortable authority of someone who has stopped noticing it. She had a notepad in front of her and a plain quill. On the far side of the table, the ministry's quick quotes quill sat in its holder and was not moving. "I take my own notes," she said, following his look. "The transcript will be written up from them. Thank you for coming in, Mr. Weasley." "Ron's fine," he said, and then wished he hadn't, because it sounded like something you said to someone you were meeting at a party. "Ron," she agreed, without any indication that it was strange. She opened her notepad. "Let's start simply. How do you know Harry Potter?" He told her. Since the train to Hogwarts, September 1991. They had been sorted into Gryffindor together. They were best friends. "And your family knows him well?" He stays with us sometimes. His home situation. He stopped. He tried again. The Dursleys. Amelia made a note. Tell me about the Dursleys. He told her what he knew from Harry, Vernon and Petunia, the cousin Dudley. He told her about the summer letters that arrived at the Burrow, explaining why Harry wasn't writing back, the replies that were too short, the things Harry didn't mention, and you noticed the absence of when you were used to him. Then she asked him to describe, specifically, the summer of 1992, and he told her all of that too. Fred and George and I took my dad's car, he said. He'd enchanted it to fly. He didn't know we were taking it. It was the middle of the night. We flew to Privet Drive. Harry had told us in a letter that he hadn't been allowed to reply. His owl was locked up, and he'd had no contact for weeks, and... He stopped again, because the thing that he was circling was the look on Harry's face when the window opened. He kept circling it and not landing on it. We flew to his window. And what did you see? Amelia asked. Her pen was moving. Bars, Ron said. On the window. Like, bolted to the outside of the frame. Iron bars. Harry was behind them. He paused. We had to use Fred and George's wand to take them off. Fred held the frame. George did the actual spell. We took the trunk down first, put it in the back, went back for the owl, and Harry climbed out. Was there anything else you observed about the room? There was a flap on the bedroom door. He said it without planning to. The memory had been sitting there since 1992, and now it came out clean and flat. A cat flap, and a padlock, on the outside, so it could be locked from the hallway. He looked at the table. The owl was in there too, in a cage. She couldn't get out. Harry couldn't open a window. He couldn't leave. Amelia wrote for a moment. Ron watched the pen move. After you brought Harry home, she said. Did you tell your parents what you'd seen? Yeah. He thought about it. Well, Mum was furious about the car. We were all in trouble for most of the summer about that. But Dad, yeah, he talked to us separately. Me and Fred and George. I told him about the bars. He didn't say a lot, but you could tell he was angry. Did your father visit 4 Privet Drive himself at any point? 2 years later, summer of '94, to collect Harry for the Quidditch World Cup. Ron's hands were still on the table. Dad went through the fireplace with us. The Dursleys' fireplace. It went not well. He found he almost wanted to laugh at the memory and was not sure what to do with that. Dad was very cheerful about it. He's always cheerful about muggles. He's fascinated by all of it. But you could tell underneath he wasn't comfortable with how they were talking to Harry. Did he comment on the conditions in the house? Ron thought about it carefully. He said the Dursleys were unpleasant. He didn't say anything about bars. The bars were gone by then. We'd taken them in '92, Amelia wrote. She did not give the writing any weight or ceremony. She wrote the way you wrote when the pen was doing the straightforward business of recording. Ron watched her and felt something in his chest doing something he couldn't quite name. I didn't know, he said, that I was supposed to report it. The bars. I thought the Dursleys were just terrible people, and Harry had a terrible home situation, and the way you handled that was to get Harry out of it and bring him somewhere better. I was 12. He heard his own voice and did not know if he was explaining or defending himself or both. I didn't think about the ministry. I didn't think about filing anything. I thought that was just what you did. You go and you get your friend. Amelia set down her pen. She looked at him for a moment, and her expression was not soft exactly, but it was direct and without judgment. "Mr. Weasley," she said, "you did exactly the right thing that night. That is not in question here." Ron nodded. He did not feel better, entirely, but he held on to the sentence, and she moved on to the next question. And the thing that was happening in his chest was not better, but it was something, and the pen was writing it all down. When he left, she thanked him. She stood up again, same as at the start, and shook his hand. He went out into the corridor, and then into the lift, and then into the atrium, and he stood in the atrium for a moment, looking at the fountain of magical brethren and its long displaced water, and did not immediately go to the flue. The deposition room was quiet after he left. Amelia read back through her notes. She had written quickly, with no shorthand, because she had learned that her own handwriting in full was easier to read cold than shorthand she had written in another context. She read, "The bars, bolted to the outside of the frame, the owl in the cage, unable to leave. The bedroom door, the cat flap, the padlock on the outside." She drew a line under cat flap. She sat with it. Not the bars. The bars were the more obvious evidence, the thing that would register most readily in a formal proceeding. But the cat flap was something else. Someone had modified a door in a child's bedroom so that a piece of food could be passed through it without the person inside being permitted to open the door. That required deliberate effort. It required finding the flap, installing it, deciding it was the appropriate mechanism for the situation. You did not arrive at a cat flap in a child's bedroom door by accident. She thought about Arabella Figg's reports, which she had not yet received, and what they would say. She thought about Albus Dumbledore, who had been receiving those reports for 14 years. She thought about a boy 3 years ago who had not understood that what he was looking at was evidence, who had simply thought, "My friend is locked in a room, so I came to get him." Everyone had assumed Dumbledore knew. He did know. That was, she was increasingly certain, the problem. The Ministry's archival records were kept on level 9, in a series of rooms that had the particular smell of old parchment and preservation charms, and the kind of institutional neglect that accumulates in places where no one visits, unless they need something. Amelia Bones visited 3 times before she found everything she was looking for, which was not because the records were difficult to navigate, but because on her first visit she had requested the Potter's will, and on her second visit she had requested the trial documentation for Sirius Orion Black, arrested Ferns November 1981. And on her third visit she had returned to confirm that what she had found on the second visit was actually what it appeared to be. It was. The will of James and Lily Potter, dated 12th of July 1980, was straightforward in the wizarding legal sense. Property, personal effects, and the guardianship of any minor children to Sirius Orion Black, named Godfather in the event of both parents' deaths. The will had been filed, witnessed, and registered. It existed. It was valid. The trial record for Sirius Orion Black did not exist. Not sealed, not classified, not archived under a restricted access notation. The arrest was logged. 1 line in the November 1981 Aura intake records, the name and date and charge, and then nothing. No arraignment, no hearing date, no Wizengamot session, no conviction record. The man had gone to Azkaban, and the Ministry had not produced a single page of due process to explain why. Amelia stood at the record shelf for a moment longer than necessary. She was not a person who registered shock in any visible way. She had spent enough years in law enforcement to understand that the Ministry's failures were both more common and more various than the public preferred to believe. But she had not, until this moment, held in her hands the specific failure of a man named, in a valid will, as the legal guardian of a child, imprisoned without trial on the same day the child was placed elsewhere by an alternative arrangement. And the two facts sitting side by side had a weight to them that she noted carefully and did not put down. She requested the relevant pages from the Aura intake log, sealed them into the formal evidence record, and went back upstairs. The word reached Grimold Place on a Thursday afternoon, in the particular manner that information reached Sirius at Grimold Place, which was through Lupin. Lupin had a contact in the DMLE administrative office who occasionally passed word about what was moving through official channels, and the word that came on Thursday was that Amelia Bones had been in the Level 9 archives twice in the past week, and had sealed several pages from the November 1981 Aura records into what was being logged as a secondary evidence file under the Harry Potter welfare investigation. Lupin told Sirius at 4:30. He stood in the doorway of the room Sirius used at the top of the house and said it plainly, without preamble, because he had learned that preamble with Sirius tended to produce worse outcomes than the plain version. Sirius did not explode. This was the thing that Lupin had been watching for, and it did not come. What came instead was a stillness. Sirius sitting down on the edge of the bed, setting his hands on his knees, and looking at a point on the floor that was not anything. Lupin had seen this stillness twice in his life, once in Hogsmeade in 1993, after 13 years, and now. He did not sleep that night. Lupin could tell in the morning by the quality of his stillness, which was different from the stillness of someone who had rested. It was the stillness of someone who had been holding the same thought for 8 hours, and had grown very practiced at holding it. "I should go to her," Sirius said over breakfast. He said it quietly, without the compressed energy of the similar statements in August. Quieter was, Lupin thought, more worrying in some ways. "Sirius, she's already looking at it. She found the will. She found the records, or the absence of records. She knows the shape of the thing. If I walked in and told her what I know about what happened on the 31st, about Peter, about everything I can account for, she would have a witness, an actual witness. She would have a fugitive," Lupin said, "who would be in custody before he reached her office. And Harry would have no living advocate with a legal claim, and your case would not be a formal review. It would be a recapture." He paused. "You heard this argument in August." "I heard it in August, and it was correct, and it is still correct," Sirius said. "And it is also still unbearable, which is where we find ourselves." He looked at his tea. "She's looking at my case. For the first time in 14 years, someone with the authority to do something about it is looking at it." "Yes." "And I have to sit in this house, and not—" "Yes," Lupin said again. He said it the same way he had said it in August, not dismissively, but fully, acknowledging the whole weight of the yes. Sirius was quiet for a long time. Outside the window of 12 Grimold Place, London went about its autumn business, grey and unhurried. "What if there were a way," Lupin said, "that did not require you to walk through the Ministry's front door?" Sirius looked up. Lupin had spent most of the previous night, he had not slept well either, working through the problem from first principles, which was the approach he had learned to apply to problems that could not be solved by the direct method. The direct method was unavailable. The indirect method was a letter. Formal, anonymized at first, addressed to Amelia Bones at the DMLE. The letter would state that a living witness with direct knowledge of the events of 34 October 1981 was willing to offer testimony in the matter of Sirius Orion Black's 1981 arrest, if formal guarantees of safety and non-arrest could be arranged in advance. The letter would not name the witness. It would demonstrate, through its precision and its knowledge of what Amelia had found, that the writer was not a crank. Lupin would write it. His handwriting was not on any ministry record that could be traced. His name, if given, would only associate the letter with a werewolf and a former Hogwarts professor, which was not ideal but was legal. The letter would go through a channel that could not be intercepted. He had in mind a specific, trusted intermediary, and it would reach Amelia Bones's desk without going through the ministry's standard owl post. "If she responds," Sirius said, when Lupin had finished. "When she responds," Lupin said, "she's already looking. She will want the witness." Sirius thought about it. He turned the idea over the way he turned things over when he was genuinely thinking rather than reacting, which was a slower process and one that Lupin had learned to recognize and give space to. "All right," Sirius said. It was not the sound of someone accepting a constraint. It was the sound of someone making a choice, which was different, and Lupin noted the difference and did not say anything about it. He wrote the letter that afternoon. He wrote it in the formal register he had used for ministry correspondence during his brief tenure as a professor. Precise, referenced, demonstrating knowledge of legal procedure without tipping his hand on its source. He stated the facts as facts. A witness existed, had direct knowledge, was willing to testify, required guarantees. He cited the specific absence of trial documentation as evidence that the witness's testimony was relevant to a formal proceeding. He sealed the letter and sent it through the intermediary he had in mind, who was reliable and owed him nothing, which was the most reliable kind. Amelia Bones received the letter on a Friday. She read it at her desk, which she had cleared for the purpose, which was not her usual practice, but which this letter seemed to warrant. She read it twice. The handwriting was even, educated. The legal vocabulary was exact. The person who had written this knew precisely which absence in the November 1981 records was the critical one. She thought for a moment. She took out a sheet of ministry letterhead and wrote 4 words. "Name the witness." She paused, then added, "I will arrange the guarantee." She sealed it and sent it back through the same channel. She marked the envelope with her personal seal, not the DMLE's departmental seal, but her own, because a personal seal meant she was writing as a named individual rather than as an office, and the distinction, in certain circumstances, had legal weight. She opened a second file on her desk. She labeled it with the date and a reference number that placed it alongside the Harry Potter welfare investigation, but logged it separately. Arrest without trial. Sirius Orion Black. November 1981. She put the letter inside. She closed the file. She did not file it in the main archive. She put it in the locked drawer she was coming to think of as the drawer that mattered. Dumbledore had been in many rooms that were designed to make their occupant feel small. The Wizengamot chamber, in its full formal configuration, was built for precisely that purpose. Tiered galleries, vaulted ceiling, the stone chair with its chains. He had sat in that chair himself, once, in very different circumstances, and had found it a useful exercise in perspective. The closed hearing room on level 2 was not the Wizengamot chamber. It was a plain room, a table, 2 chairs, tall windows, looking onto the atrium of the ministry's internal courtyard. Amelia Bones was already seated when he arrived, which told him she had arrived early and wished him to know it. He recognized the tactic and found it, on balance, admirable. "Headmaster," she said, and stood briefly. She did not offer her hand. "Head of department." He sat. "Thank you for accommodating my schedule. October is a busy month at Hogwarts. I appreciate your coming in." She had the same notepad he had heard about from Lupin, the same plain quill. The ministry recorder waited at the side of the table, its nib raised. Dumbledore looked at it once, and not again. He had given statements before. "Shall we begin?" he said. She began with the circumstances of Harry's placement at 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, on 1st November 1981. The date, the parties present, the legal and magical reasoning behind the decision. He was pleased to answer this clearly. The truth, in this case, was his best available argument, which he had known it would be since August. He explained Lily Potter's sacrifice. He explained it with the precision of someone who had spent 14 years understanding it. Lily Potter had died willingly, in the place of her son, and the act of willing self-sacrifice for love had produced a counter-enchantment that no dark magic could penetrate. The curse had rebounded. Voldemort had been destroyed, or very nearly destroyed, enough to scatter him without a body, enough to end the First Wizarding War in a single night, and the protection that Lily's sacrifice had created persisted in the blood of her living relatives. As long as Harry Potter could call the home of Lily's blood family his home, as long as he returned to that house, and it remained, in some genuine sense, where he lived, the enchantment remained active, and Voldemort's forces could not touch him there. There was no other location in Britain, Dumbledore said, where this protection could have been anchored. There was no other blood relative. Petunia Dursley, née Evans, is Lily's only surviving sister. The placement was magically necessary. He set his hands on the table, unhurried. I want to be precise about this, because the precision matters. The protection was not a convenience. It was the reason Harry Potter survived his second encounter with Voldemort in 1992, his third in 1993, and every encounter between 1981 and the present. I chose Harry's safety over Harry's comfort, and I understood that I was making that choice. Amelia had not interrupted him once. She looked at her notepad and then at him. "Thank you," she said. "I want to be certain I understand the magical mechanism correctly. The enchantment required that Harry Potter call 4 Privet Drive home. It required that he return there, and that his connection to the household as his residence be genuine. That is correct. It did not require," she said, with the same even precision, "that Harry Potter sleep in a bedroom with a padlocked door." A silence. "It did not," Dumbledore said. "It did not require bars on his bedroom window. It did not require that his school letters, and the property contained within them, be confiscated and denied to him for extended periods. It did not require that he be given inadequate food, insufficient clothing, or sleeping conditions that a ministry welfare standard would not accept." She turned a page in her notepad. "I am citing here Deposition Record, 1995-DMLE-WL-0004, which is the formal testimony of Ronald Weasley, age 16, direct eyewitness to the conditions at 4 Privet Drive in summer 1992, corroborated by the additional record of Arthur Weasley. I am also citing Deposition Record 1995-DMLE-WL-002, the formal testimony of Arabella Figg, which I received in full last month." She looked up. None of the conditions documented in those records were required by the blood protection enchantment. Is that an accurate characterization of the magic? Dumbledore looked at her. He had known, from the moment she had asked her first question in that courtroom in August, that Amelia Bones was going to ask him exactly this. He had prepared for it. He had told himself, in the weeks between then and now, that his preparation was adequate, that he could answer honestly and hold the frame, could acknowledge the question without allowing it to become the verdict. He answered honestly. "No," he said. The protection required only that Harry call the house home. It did not specify the conditions of that home. He said it without qualification. He had found, over a very long career, that the attempt to soften an honest answer with subsequent qualification only made the honest answer louder by contrast. He said it clearly, and he let it sit. Amelia wrote it down. He watched the pen move across the page, and he understood, with the particular clarity of someone who has lived long enough to recognize a turning point, that what he had just said would sit in Amelia Bones's formal record for a very long time. "I want it understood," he said, "that I did not intend to cause Harry harm. I believed that the magical protection and the long-term survival it afforded outweighed what I understood to be an imperfect domestic situation. I received reports. I monitored the situation. I judged it adequate." "Your definition of adequate," Amelia said, "is what the investigation is examining." She made a note. "Thank you, Headmaster. I may have additional questions. Your response will be filed as part of the formal record." He stood. He took his leave with the courtesy that had always served him in difficult rooms, unhurried, without visible distress, the long silver beard and the elaborate robes moving together as he turned toward the door. He did not look back. Looking back, in situations of this kind, produced no useful information. The minister came to see her 3 days later. He came in the late afternoon, after the general administrative staff had gone home for the evening, which told Amelia that he preferred this conversation not to have witnesses. He was gracious. He sat across from her with his hands folded and his smile in place, and he told her that she was, without question, the finest head of department the DMLE had known in his tenure, which she noted was the second time she had heard this particular sentence in the past 3 months. He told her that the welfare findings were important, thorough, and reflected exactly the kind of diligence the ministry required of its senior officials. He then told her that a formal censure of Albus Dumbledore, with Hogwarts in session, with the current climate of uncertainty regarding certain returned threats he would prefer not to name directly, would be destabilizing in ways that would not serve the ministry's interests or Harry Potter's safety. Amelia listened. She said, "Of course, Minister. I'll take that under advisement." She did not say anything else, and she did not write down that it had been said in front of him. After he left, she wrote it down. She opened the formal record and noted the date, the time, and the substance of the minister's private suggestion that the investigation moderate its scope in the interest of institutional stability. She noted it without commentary. The record did not need commentary. Its existence was the commentary. She turned back to the transcript of Dumbledore's deposition. She found the page she wanted and read the line again. No. The protection required only that Harry call the house home. She placed this page on top of the page from Ron Weasley's deposition, on which she had drawn a line under the word padlock. 2 pages, Dumbledore's word against his own word. She thought about the shape of things. It was not a complicated shape. It was, in some ways, the oldest shape in the law. A person with power had made a decision that benefited the person with power and cost the person without it, and had told themselves it was for the best. The magic had been real. The necessity had been real. And a boy had spent 14 years in a room with a padlocked door because no one who held authority over his situation had thought it necessary to walk through a door and look. She closed the file. She put it in the drawer that mattered. The case was beginning, she thought, to have a shape. The walk from the leaky cauldron to the ministry took Lupin 40 minutes in November, which was longer than it needed to be, but was the time he required. He had learned, over years of walking toward things he would rather not face, that arriving with the right amount of time behind him made a difference to what kind of person walked through the door. He catalogued what he knew. It was an old habit, the werewolf's habit of accounting for himself before other people could do it less generously. What he knew in the matter of Harry James Potter. He had known that Dumbledore placed Harry with Lily's sister in November of 1981. He had known the blood protection argument. Sirius had explained it to him, and Sirius had heard it from Dumbledore, and they had both accepted it in the immediate aftermath of the war's sudden end because they had been too shattered to do otherwise. He had known from James that Petunia Dursley was not a warm woman, that she had resented Lily's magic and Lily's world and had said as much on more than one occasion, and that her husband was not a kind man. He had known all of this as individual facts. He had been keeping them individual for 14 years, the problem with looking at them together, at knowing the blood protection arrangement, and knowing what Petunia was like, and knowing where Harry was, and then moving forward in time to the Year 3 student who had sat in his Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, looking like someone who had learned not to ask for things, was that looking at them together produced a conclusion, and the conclusion was one he had spent a very long time refusing to produce. He arrived at the ministry with 3 minutes to spare. The deposition room was becoming familiar to him, in the way of all rooms you visit under obligation, the table, the 2 chairs, the window giving onto the internal courtyard. Amelia Bones was already seated. She stood briefly as he entered. He shook her hand. "Mr. Lupin," she said. "Thank you for coming in." "Of course," he said, and meant it, which surprised him slightly. She began, as she had with the others. He had spoken to Arthur, and Arthur had told him the shape of how she proceeded. At the beginning. Not the beginning of Harry's childhood, the beginning of Lupin's relationship to Harry's parents. Who were they to him? How long had he known them? He told her he had met James Potter and Sirius Black on the Hogwarts Express in September 1971. They had been 11. They had been friends, the particular kind you make at 11 and carry for the rest of your life. The 4 of them had been called the Marauders, privately, by themselves. It was a name that had survived, which was more than some of them had. Lily he had known through James, had watched the long years of James's persistent, often misguided pursuit of her attention eventually become something genuine, had been at their wedding in 1979, had known as much as any of their friends what they were to each other. He spoke of them well and with precision. Amelia listened and made notes. In November 1981, she said, when Harry Potter was placed with Petunia Dursley. Were you aware of this? Yes. He had been in Dumbledore's confidence at that point, in the specific and limited way that Order members were kept in Dumbledore's confidence, told what was necessary for their role. Sirius had told him separately, and Dumbledore had confirmed it. The blood protection, the placement. Did you visit Privet Drive at that time? No. In the years between 1981 and 1991, the decade before Harry began at Hogwarts, did you visit Harry at any point? No. She moved forward. She asked about his Year 3 teaching post, about seeing Harry as a student. He described what he had observed. Harry's quick reflexes, his talent, the particular quality of over-alertness that experienced teachers recognized in students who had learned to anticipate trouble before it arrived. She asked whether Harry had seemed, in Lupin's assessment, to be thriving. Lupin considered the word. He seemed competent, he said finally. He seemed to manage. He did not seem... No. He was not what I would call thriving. During that year, 1993 to 1994, did you visit 4 Privet Drive? No. Did you raise Harry's welfare as a concern with Headmaster Dumbledore or with any other authority who had oversight of his placement? No. He kept his voice even. I assumed Dumbledore was monitoring the situation. I think we all assumed, that if there were a serious problem, Dumbledore would know and would act. Amelia wrote this down. She did not look up immediately. The third entry of that assumption in the formal record, she said, without inflection. I know, Lupin said. She set down her pen. She was very still for a moment, in the way he had come to understand meant she was arriving at something she had been working toward. Mr. Lupin, she said, you were this boy's father's closest friend. You knew where Harry lived. You knew his parents were dead. You knew, from your own observations as his teacher, that he was not thriving. A pause. Did you ever, in 14 years, go to Privet Drive and knock on the door to ask how he was? The room was entirely quiet. No, Lupin said. She did not move for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and wrote it down. He did not break. He had known the question was coming, had known it for 3 months, since the morning the subpoena arrived. And he had decided, in the 40 minutes of walking, that he was going to answer it straight, because it was the only honest thing left available to him. He sat very still in the chair and told her why. The werewolf stigma. His condition was illegal to conceal in any formal capacity. Visiting a ministry-registered magical minor as an unregistered former guardian figure would have invited questions he could not answer without disclosing what he was, and disclosure would have produced his removal from Harry's life regardless, possibly worse. His poverty. He had no fixed address for most of the intervening years, no stable income, no home he could have offered as an alternative, even if he had succeeded in demonstrating that an alternative was needed. His peripatetic life. His belief, genuine and consistent, that the blood protection argument was sound, and that Dumbledore's arrangement, while imperfect, was the arrangement that kept Harry alive. And then the reason he had not told himself until this morning, that looking clearly at what Harry's life might be like in that house required him to look at the fact that he had known and had not gone, and he had decided 14 years ago that he could not carry that, and also keep going. So he had not looked. He said this quietly, without excusing it. Every reason I've given you is true, he said. I'm not offering them as arguments. I'm offering them as the account. Amelia listened to all of it. She had not interrupted him once, and when he finished she did not immediately speak. She looked at her notepad, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of someone who is completing a thought rather than deciding whether to be kind. I'm going to step outside the formal record for a moment, she said. The recorder will note the pause. She looked at him. I'm not charging you with anything, Mr. Lupin. I want you to understand that. He looked up. This investigation, she said, is not about assigning fault to every person who trusted the wrong system. It's about naming the system. She let this sit for a moment, then picked up her pen and tapped it once, lightly, on the notepad. Back on record. She closed the notepad. Thank you for your testimony. The formal transcript will be filed with the DMLE record. He stood. He shook her hand again. He went out into the corridor, and then into the lift, and then out through the ministry's entrance into the street. November in London was grey and damp and smelled of wet stone and exhaust from the muggle traffic along Whitehall. He stood on the pavement for a moment, and then started walking, without any particular destination, because movement was what he needed, and the direction was secondary. He did not feel better. He had not expected to feel better. What he felt, as he walked, was something he had not felt in a very long time. Not relief, not absolution, nothing as clean as either of those, but something precise, an accurate accounting. The weight he was carrying was the weight he was actually carrying, not the smaller, more manageable weight he had been pretending to carry for 14 years. It was heavier, but it was true, and he had found, over a long life of managing difficult things, that true weights were, in a strange way, easier to bear than false ones. You could position yourself correctly under a weight you knew the actual size of. He walked north into the grey city and did not stop for a long time. Arabella Figg arrived at the deposition room at precisely the appointed time, which Amelia had noted was a characteristic of witnesses who were nervous about being late and had therefore been anxious for considerably longer than necessary. She was a small woman, grey-haired, with the slightly rumpled quality that Amelia had observed at the August hearing, the quality that could be genuine or could be cultivated, and which Amelia had, by now, concluded was both. "Mrs. Figg," Amelia said, and gestured to the chair. "Thank you for coming in. Before we begin, I want to refer to your testimony from the hearing on the 12th of August. You described the Dementor attack, you confirmed the Patronus, and you identified yourself to me as someone placed on Privet Drive to watch Harry Potter. That is in the formal record, and I won't ask you to repeat it. What I want today is everything before the 12th of August. Figg settled into the chair. She put her hands in her lap. "How far back?" "As far back as it goes," Amelia said. She had been placed in Little Whinging, Wisteria Walk, a short walk from Privet Drive, by Albus Dumbledore, at some point prior to Harry Potter's first birthday. The instruction had been to watch the boy and report. She had been watching for 14 years. Amelia made a note and let her continue. The arrangement, Figg explained, had required a particular approach. If Harry had been happy visiting her, if her home had offered him a refuge from the Dursleys' household, the Dursleys would have become reluctant to send him, which would have reduced Figg's opportunities to observe him. So she had made her home unpleasant to visit. She had shown him photographs of her cats. She had served him stale cake and discussed topics of no interest to a child. She had been, in her word, dull. "So that the Dursleys would use you," Amelia said. "So they'd keep sending him round," Figg agreed. "If I was boring, he was easy for them to dispose of for an afternoon and forget about. That was useful." Amelia wrote this down with the same even pen she used for everything. "How did you report? And how often?" "By owl, every month. More often if something warranted it." She had always sent the reports to Dumbledore directly. She had kept copies. Amelia looked up from her notepad. "I'd like to see them," she said. Figg reached into the bag she had brought, a worn fabric thing, large, and produced a bundle of parchment tied with a piece of brown string. She set it on the table. Amelia looked at it. The bundle was thick. She could see, from the slight variation in the parchment's colour, that it spanned years. Older, slightly yellowed pages at one end, shading into cleaner, newer ones at the other. The string was tied neatly. She did not reach for it immediately. She sat for a moment with the fact of it. "These are copies of everything you sent to Dumbledore," she said. "Everyone," Figg said. "I'm not a trusting person by nature. I kept records." Amelia reached out and untied the string. She read with the part of her mind that was always reading. The professional habit of moving through a document quickly and retaining the architecture of it, the pattern, the shape. What the reports showed, across the span of the bundle, was this. A small boy observed through the windows of a Muggle house and across the garden of a Muggle street, growing from toddler to child to early adolescent. The reports were methodical. Figg had noted Harry's physical appearance on each contact, his height, his weight as best she could estimate it, his clothing, his demeanour, anything she had observed directly. The clothing recurred. Too large, too small, worn through at the elbows, hand-me-down quality. The thinness. Amelia had read deprivation records before, had seen the careful language of witnesses describing children in inadequate conditions without understanding that the language was clinical and the situation was not, and she recognized the texture of it now. Fig had not described it as deprivation. She had described what she had seen, a boy who was too thin for his age in the summer of 1983, a boy wearing a shirt too large for him by several sizes in the summer of 1985, a boy who flinched when someone moved quickly near him. Fig had written, seemed startled easily, possible explanation unclear, in the summer of 1988. One report, from 1986, noted a bruise on Harry's forearm during a garden contact. Could not confirm cause, Fig had written, did not seem to want to discuss it, did not press. Amelia laid that page to one side. Every page had a date at the top. Every page bore, at the bottom, a notation that the report had been sent to Headmaster Albus Dumbledore by owl post on the date given. She looked up from the reports. Fig was watching her with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a particular moment and has now arrived at it. "What responses did you receive from Professor Dumbledore?" Amelia asked. "Acknowledgements," Fig said. "He always confirmed receipt. Sometimes a brief note. Thank you. Noted. Continue as you are." She paused. No changes. No additional instructions, mostly. He never asked me to escalate anything, and he never came to Privet Drive himself, not that I saw. No one from the ministry ever came. Nothing changed. Amelia set down her pen. She did not pick it up again immediately. She was thinking, in the precise, sequenced way she thought through a case that was taking a shape she had already predicted, but hadn't wanted to confirm, about a padlock on a bedroom door, about a cat flap, about Ron Weasley at 16 saying, in the voice of someone describing the obvious, "I thought the Dursleys were horrible. I didn't think about filing a report. I was 12. About Remus Lupin sitting very still and saying, no. About Albus Dumbledore, silver-haired and entirely composed across the table in October, saying, no. The protection required only that Harry call the house home. And now she was holding a decade of documentation, dated reports, specific observations, the bruise in 1986 with "could not confirm cause" in Fig's careful hand, the clothing too large, the thinness, every report sent to Dumbledore, every report acknowledged. He had known. He had been told, and every month for 14 years the response had been, "Noted. Continue as you are." She did not let any of this show on her face. It was not a strategy. She was not performing calm, but a function. There was too much to do for anger to take up working space. She picked up her pen. She continued. "You said you were placed there prior to Harry's first birthday," she said. "So from approximately October or November 1981. "November," Fig said, "just after he arrived. Dumbledore arranged the rental himself. And you remained until the present day." "Until the hearing in August, yes. After the hearing, I wasn't given any instruction to change anything, so I've stayed. Someone might still need to know what's happening on that street." Amelia looked at her for a moment. "Is there anything else in the reports you want to draw my attention to before I close this portion of the testimony?" Fig was quiet for a moment. "There was a summer," she said, "around 1991, before Hogwarts. I noted that he'd started spending time in the garden by himself, which he didn't usually do. He was normally kept inside. He was sitting in the garden, and he was very still, and he looked, I wrote, self-contained, because that was the word I had, But what I meant was that he looked like a person who had decided not to want things. She paused. That stayed with me. Amelia wrote it down. When Fig left, Amelia gathered the reports from the table and squared them against her palm. She fitted them into a folder from the evidence kit in the cabinet by the window. She wrote the label in her own hand, with her usual small and even lettering, Re. Harry James Potter. Welfare Investigation. Privet Drive. 1981-1995. Evidence Series 1. She put the folder in the locked drawer. She stood with her hand on the key for a moment. She had locked many drawers in 20 years of this work. She thought this was the most important one. She turned the key and went back to her desk. Mundungus Fletcher was not under arrest. He had made sure everyone in the vicinity of the ministry holding area understood this, including the attendant who brought him tea, the attendant's colleague who happened to walk through the corridor, and Amelia herself when she came to collect him, at which point she told him, without particular interest, that she was aware he was not under arrest, and led him down the corridor to the deposition room. He sat in the chair with the particular posture of a man who has arranged himself to look relaxed and has not quite succeeded. He was a round-faced, slightly dishevelled person of indeterminate middle years, with the kind of eyes that moved quickly to the exits when a room changed. Amelia had known men like Fletcher, men who existed in the gaps between the legal and the extra-legal, whose usefulness to any given party depended on their ability to be somewhere else when things became formal. He was not unintelligent. He was simply a man who had spent his life optimizing for the wrong outcomes. "I want to be clear," he said, as she settled into her chair, "that I'm cooperating voluntarily." "I know," Amelia said. "Thank you. Let's begin." She began, as she began every deposition, at the beginning. Fletcher's connection to the Order of the Phoenix, which she referenced by its existence rather than its membership, because she was interested in the facts rather than in producing his discomfort, was the context, not the subject. The subject was the night of the 2nd of August, 1995, and his assigned duty on that night. He confirmed it without prompting. He had been assigned to maintain a watch over Harry Potter at 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, on the evening of the 2nd of August. He was to observe and be present. He did not use the word guard, she noted. He used the word present, with a slight emphasis that suggested he found guard professionally limiting. "And were you present?" Amelia asked. Fletcher's hands, folded on the table, shifted slightly. "I was present for the majority of the evening, but not the entirety. I had a business matter that required brief attention." "A business matter," Amelia said. It was time-sensitive. She made a note. She did not look up while she made it, and she did not alter her expression, and she did not pursue the business matter. Not because it was unimportant, but because it was not what she needed from Fletcher today. She needed the timeline, and she needed it in the formal record attached to his name. "At approximately what time did you leave your post?" she asked. He thought about this in a way that suggested he was calculating rather than remembering. He gave her a time. She wrote it down. "And when did you return?" A pause. "I didn't return that night. There was an incident while I was away. I didn't think it would be useful to—" "You didn't return," Amelia said, and wrote it down. She set down her pen and looked at him. "Mr. Fletcher, what I'm about to tell you is already in the formal record of the ministry's trace office. I'm telling you as a matter of professional courtesy, so that you understand the information I'm working from. The trace alarm recording, the Patronus charm cast by Harry Potter at Magnolia Crescent on the night of the 2nd of August, was logged by the improper use of magic office at a time shortly after the departure time you have given me. The The proximity is close enough that it is not coincidental. You left. The attack followed. Fletcher's expression did something complicated that moved through several stages and landed on something that was not quite indignation. I'm not responsible for a pair of dementors showing up. No, Amelia said. That is the question I'm now interested in. She picked up her pen. In your experience, and I understand you have considerable experience with the informal management of various situations that occasionally touch on the ministry's official activities, is it usual for dementors to appear in a Muggle residential suburb within a short time of an assigned guard departing his post? Fletcher looked at her. She looked at him with the same even attention she gave to everything. I don't know anything about dementors, he said. I'm asking in general terms. Is the timing, in your view, coincidental? Another calculation behind the eyes. I wouldn't know what would make it not coincidental, he said carefully. Dementors go where they're sent. I suppose if someone sent them to that street on that night, they'd have needed to know the guard wasn't there. Or they'd have needed to know the guard was going to leave. He stopped himself. I'm not saying anything about that either way. I understand, Amelia said. She wrote it down. You've been very helpful. She charged him formally before he left. Dereliction of duty in the discharge of a protective watch over a ministry-registered magical minor. The charge was procedural, and she explained this to him. It established a formal record of his absence on the night in question, which the investigation required. It was not a criminal proceeding. He protested anyway, with the professional reflexes of a man who protested charges as a matter of habit, regardless of their nature, and she waited for him to finish without interrupting, and then she repeated that he was not under arrest and thanked him for his cooperation, and he left. The room was quiet after his footsteps receded down the corridor. Amelia sat with what she had. Dementors did not self-deploy. This was not a subtle point. It was the most basic fact about Dementor governance in the British Wizarding Administration. Dementors were not autonomous agents of detention. They were creatures that had, over centuries, been brought into an arrangement with the ministry that suited both parties, and the arrangement depended on an authorization chain. A Dementor moved from Azkaban to a ministry-sanctioned location because someone in the authorization chain had ordered it. The chain was not complicated. Warden notification, DMLE signatory, and, for operations outside standard Azkaban perimeter, sign-off from the department head or, in cases of emergency, the minister's office. She had signed no such order for the 2nd of August. She remembered August clearly. She had been preparing materials for Harry Potter's hearing and had not ordered any Dementor deployment to Little Whinging or anywhere else. If the order had come from above her, from the minister's office, it would have gone around her, which was irregular but technically permissible in genuine emergency circumstances. Fletcher's phrasing sat in her mind. They'd have needed to know the guard wasn't there, or they'd have needed to know the guard was going to leave. She opened the file she had prepared from the Azkaban deployment logs. The logs were kept separately from the authorization records. One was Azkaban's operational record, one was the ministry's administrative record, and she had requested both sets for the week surrounding the 2nd of August. The Azkaban logs showed it clearly. Dementor movement, evening of the 2nd, in the direction of Surrey. A logged departure, a logged return. She turned to the authorization records. She looked for the matching document, the form that should sit alongside every logged Dementor deployment, bearing a date, a signature, a reference code placed in sequence with the others. There was nothing for the 2nd of August with the right date and time. There was nothing with the right reference code sequence. What was there was a gap, a place in the sequence where a document should be and was not, and alongside the gap, filed between the 1st of August and the 4th, a form that bore the wrong reference code. Not obviously wrong, not the kind of wrong that would catch an administrative eye doing a routine check. The kind of wrong that you only recognized if you had signed hundreds of these forms yourself and knew precisely what a correctly formatted ministry authorization looked like. Someone had tried to fill the gap. Someone who had not done it before and did not know how the codes ran. Amelia did not reach for the form yet. She sat very still and let the shape of the thing become clear. Someone had sent dementors to a Muggle suburb on a night when an order guard had abandoned his post and had done it without the authorization of the head of the DMLE, and had then attempted to insert a false authorization record after the fact. The thread existed. It was thin, and it was fragile, and it led somewhere very specific. She picked up her pen. She began to pull it. January arrived with its particular cold, the kind London reserves for the weeks after Christmas, when the decorations have come down and the city remembers it is not a warm place. Amelia Bones spent the first week of it at her desk. She had pulled the thread through December. What she found, laid out across her desk in the precise arrangement she used for evidence that needed to be held all at once in the mind, was this: a Dementor deployment on the evening of the 2nd August 1995, logged in Azkaban's own warden records, no matching authorization form in the ministry's administrative sequence, and in the place where the form should have been, a document that looked, at a casual reading, like the real thing, and was not. The reference codes were the problem, not obviously wrong, not the kind of error you would catch unless you had spent years managing the ministry's authorization sequence and knew the way the codes ran. They were sequential within each department, cross-referenced to the issuing office and the calendar month, and the document that had been inserted bore a code from the wrong month's sequence. Someone had picked a number that looked plausible, without understanding that the numbers were not arbitrary. It was the kind of mistake made by someone who had seen the forms, but never had cause to generate one. She had been head of the DMLE for 9 years. She had signed hundreds of these forms. She laid the false document flat and traced the authorization chain. The formal chain for any Dementor deployment outside standard Azkaban perimeter was 3 links. First, the Azkaban warden submitted a notification of request. Second, the head of the DMLE signed the authorization. That was her office, her signature, her responsibility. Third, for operations involving Muggle areas or civilian proximity, the form required secondary sign-off from the Minister for Magic. These 3 signatures, in sequence, with the correct codes, constituted a valid deployment order. She had not signed anything for the 2nd of August. The minister's alleged counter-signature on the false document bore a date stamp that was internally inconsistent with the minister's official calendar for that week. But there was a 4th path. The ministry did not advertise it, because it was not a formal path, but a functional one that had accreted over years of administrative practice. The senior undersecretary to the minister had, in certain documented instances, acted on the minister's behalf in signing emergency authorizations when the minister was unavailable or wished to maintain distance from a particular decision. This practice had no statutory basis. It existed because power in the ministry, as in most institutions, did not sit only where the organizational chart said it sat. The senior undersecretary was not required to generate an authorization in the standard DMLE format. She would have her own documentation, and if she chose not to generate documentation at all, if she made the request directly to the Azkaban warden through informal channels and trusted that the warden would not question a request from the minister's office, the gap in the administrative record would be precisely what Amelia was now looking at. She wrote none of this down. She sat with it for a long time. The minister's summons came in the 3rd week of January through his personal secretary, phrased as an invitation to tea. She went up to level 1 at 3:30 on a Thursday afternoon. He was gracious. He had always been gracious in the way of politicians who have learned that graciousness is more effective than its alternatives, and who have practiced it for long enough that it was indistinguishable from genuine warmth. He poured the tea himself. He told her that the welfare investigation had produced findings that he considered significant and important, that he had the highest regard for her diligence and her department's professionalism, that she was, and here he used the phrase she had now heard twice, the finest head of the DMLE in his tenure. She accepted the tea. She waited. "The matter of the Dementor deployment on the 2nd of August, he said, with the slightly regretful tone of a man raising an unpleasant necessity he wishes he did not have to raise. "I understand you've been examining the authorization records." "It's part of the standard audit process for the investigation," Amelia said. Of course it is." He set down his cup. "I want to assure you that my office has reviewed the relevant records, and we are satisfied that the deployment, while irregular in its documentation, falls within the category of anomalous Dementor patrol drift. You know what the Dementors are like. They're not the most predictable creatures at the best of times. The important thing, really, is that Harry Potter defended himself effectively, which the Wizengamot found entirely lawful, which you presided over brilliantly. I don't think there's any further productive line of inquiry in the deployment records themselves." He looked at her. She looked at him. She had been in law enforcement for 22 years. She had sat across tables from people who were lying to her so many times that she had stopped needing to name it, the way you stop needing to name the smell of rain. She knew it the way she knew the wrong reference codes, not as a specific allegation, but as a pattern that did not fit. The minister's eyes had the quality of someone who was watching carefully to see how much she was going to require of him. "Of course, Minister," she said. "I'll note your office's position in the administrative record." "Splendid." He relaxed by a fraction she did not miss. "I knew you'd understand. It's a sensitive time. The climate, the uncertainty about certain matters I know you're aware of. And I think the department has quite enough on its hands with the welfare investigation, which is doing genuinely important work." "Thank you," Amelia said. "I'll see myself out." She returned to her office and closed the door. She sat at her desk, and she breathed for a moment. Not from anxiety. She was not anxious in any way that would have been recognizable as such from the outside, but from the discipline of someone who knows that the next action must be exact and wants to take it exactly. Then she opened the lower drawer of her desk where she kept the strong box, and she unlocked it with the private key she had carried since she took this office, and she took out the strong box and set it on the desk. She made a copy, precise, word for word, of the false authorization document. She noted in her own hand, on a separate sheet of paper, the date, the false reference code, the month discrepancy, the functional path available to the senior undersecretary to the minister, and the fact that on the afternoon of this date, the Minister for Magic had privately requested that she consider the Dementor deployment matter closed. She did not write the name of anyone she suspected. Names were allegations. This was a record of facts, and facts were sufficient. She wrote on the outside of the folder, in the same small, even hand she used for everything, for the record. She put the folder in the strong box. She locked it. She put the strong box back in the lower drawer and locked the drawer. She returned the key to its place. Then she sat for a little longer in the last light of the January afternoon, which came in grey and level through her window, and made the office look, for a moment, like a room in a very old building where important things had been decided before. She had known, when she opened the Azkaban logs in December, that the thread led somewhere she was not supposed to look. She had not stopped. She had now been told by the man with the authority to tell her that she should consider the matter resolved. She was not going to consider it resolved. These were the two facts of her situation. She had been a fair and methodical person all her professional life. She was aware that fairness and method were not, by themselves, sufficient protection against people who held the kind of power that the Minister for Magic held, and was willing to exercise informally. She had been aware of this abstractly for years, in the way one is aware of a risk that has not yet taken a specific form. It was taking a specific form now. She put on her outer robes. She tidied her desk. She thought briefly about her niece Susan, who was at Hogwarts this year, and who had her mother's hair and Amelia's habit of asking inconvenient questions in a perfectly pleasant voice. She thought about her brother Edgar, dead now 14 years, who had asked the same kinds of questions and had not been careful enough in a time when careful was the only option. She would be careful. She went home through the atrium, her footsteps even on the polished floor, the strong-box key in her pocket, the ministry's fountain glittering behind her, and the cold air of the winter street waiting at the top of the stairs. She did not look back. The corridor outside the Wizengamot chamber was not a place designed for waiting, which was probably the point. Harry stood with his back against the stone wall and his hands at his sides, and he thought about breathing in the specific way that meant he was trying not to think about anything else. Snape passed at 9:45. He was moving quickly, robes dark against the ministry's pale stone, and he did not stop and he did not speak. But he looked at Harry as he passed, directly, briefly, with the kind of look that was not warm and was not contemptuous, and was something else that Harry did not have an exact word for. An acknowledgement. Something that said, "I know you are here, and I am aware of what you are about to do." Snape moved on without breaking stride. Harry watched him go, and then looked back at the wall. Dumbledore was already in the chamber. Amelia had told Harry this, quietly, when she met him in the atrium. The headmaster would be present in the gallery, but wouldn't be called to testify today. He had given his deposition in October. His presence this morning was as a witness to the formal session, not as a participant in it. Harry had not spoken to Dumbledore since August. Sirius was somewhere in the building. Amelia had told him this. Arrangements had been made quietly, so that a person with an interest in today's proceedings could be near without being visible. Not in the gallery. In the building. Harry held this the way you hold something when your hands have nothing else to do with themselves. It helped. Amelia came out at 9:55, gathered him with a brief look, and walked him through the door. The chamber was different with the full Wizengamot in it. He had been here in August, had sat in the stone chair and watched them vote on whether he was allowed to defend himself. But today the chair was not for him. He was a witness, not the accused, and the difference showed itself in the table at the front where he was seated, in the chair that was ordinary wood, in the way the plum-robed members in the tiered galleries arranged themselves with the slightly different quality of attention that goes with a proceeding rather than a hearing. There were more of them than he remembered. The room felt very tall. Amelia sat across from him. She had her notepad and her plain quill and the ministry's recorder at the side, and she thanked him for coming in the same even tone she used for everything. Then she began. She began with the cupboard under the stairs at 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, and asked him to describe it. He described it. He said what it was. A cupboard under the stairs, approximately 3 feet wide and 6 feet deep, containing a fold-up bed and the things he had accumulated as a small child, in which he had slept from some point before his conscious memory until approximately his 11th birthday. He said this in the voice he had, the flat, factual voice, the one that had learned not to invite attention by sounding like anything in particular. He did not intend to sound the way he sounded. It was simply the voice that came when he was reporting something true. Amelia made a note. She asked the next question. He answered all the questions she asked him. They moved forward in time. She was methodical, decade by decade, in her organization, and she gave him space to complete each answer before she continued. She asked about food. He answered. She asked about clothing. He told her about the hand-me-downs, the shoes. She did not react. He noted this and found it easier than the alternative. The summers, she said. Tell me about the summers. He told her about the summer of 1992. He told her about arriving home from his first year at Hogwarts, about his letters being intercepted and no post getting through, about Hedwig being put in her cage with a lock on it so she could not carry messages out, about the bars that appeared on his bedroom window before the start of term, bolted to the outside of the frame, about the padlock on the outside of his bedroom door and the cat flap through which meals were passed when the Dursleys were particularly angry with him or wished to be particularly certain he could not leave. He said all of this in the same flat voice. "Are you all right, Mr. Potter?" He looked up. Amelia was looking at him, not with the investigator's measuring attention, but directly, the same direct attention she had given him in August when she asked about the Patronus and had looked, he had thought then, like someone who was actually listening. "Yes," he said. She accepted this. She made a note. She continued. The chamber was not quiet while he spoke. He could hear movement in the gallery above, robes shifting, occasional murmurs, the sound a room makes when many people are working to contain their reactions. He kept his eyes on the table and answered each question. When it was done, when she had asked everything she had, and he had answered it, Amelia thanked him. She set down her quill. She turned to face the full chamber. She spoke to the Wizengamot for perhaps 10 minutes. He did not need to speak. This was not his part. She cited the evidence by record number. Ron Weasley's prior deposition, now corroborated precisely by Harry's own testimony. Arabella Figg's decade of reports, submitted as Evidence Series 1. Albus Dumbledore's own deposition, in which he had confirmed, in his own words, that the blood protection required only residency, and not the specific conditions of the home. And today's testimony from Harry James Potter, age 15, the subject of the welfare arrangement, given in full. She presented the formal finding, a pattern of welfare neglect operating under an unauthorized private arrangement between a named individual and a Muggle household, without ministry oversight or monitoring, over a period of 14 years. She recommended the finding be entered into the Wizengamot's formal record and adjudicated accordingly. She cited the specific Wizengamot provision under which a formal censure could be applied. The Wizengamot convened for a period. Votes were recorded. The finding was entered. Then Amelia stood again. She presented the second matter, the will of James and Lily Potter, dated July 1980, naming Sirius Orion Black as guardian of any minor children. The formal absence of any trial record for Black's arrest on 3rd November 1981, no arraignment, no hearing, no conviction. She noted that the DMLE's own records, upon review, contained only a single-line intake notation. She stated that a living witness had come forward with willingness to testify, under arranged guarantees, regarding the events of 31st October 1981. She requested formal referral of the matter to a Wizengamot review panel. She did not look at Harry when she said it. He looked at her. The Wizengamot voted on the referral. The referral passed. He sat with this. Somewhere in the building, in a room he could not point to, in a place that Amelia had arranged, Sirius was also sitting with this. The referral was not an acquittal. It was not freedom. It was a formal acknowledgement in the Wizengamot's own record that there was a case to review, which meant that the ministry had agreed, by vote, publicly, irrevocably, that Sirius Orion Black's 1981 imprisonment was a question rather than a settled matter. 14 years after the fact, in this domed stone room, the ministry had agreed that a question existed. Harry breathed out. The session was adjourned. Someone appeared to collect him, and he went. And in the corridor he stopped and stood against the same wall where he had waited at 9:45. The corridor was quieter now. He thought, "It is in the record. Nothing that happened in that room today can be undone." He had not known, until this moment, how much he had needed that. Amelia returned to her office at 12:30 and stood for a moment at the window. She did not feel triumphant. She was not built for triumph in the way some people were. For the moment of completed effort, the satisfaction of the weight leaving the shoulders. She had been doing her job. Doing it correctly did not produce a particular feeling. It produced the continuation of the next thing, which was always waiting. What she felt was something quieter, that she had placed what needed to be placed into the record before anything else could happen. The formal finding, the referral, the testimony, noted and entered. Whatever came next, the political consequences, the attention she was now going to attract from parties who preferred these matters unrecorded, it was in the record. And records, unlike people, did not depend on the continued safety of the person who had made them. She opened the lower drawer and looked at the strong box. She locked the drawer again without taking it out. It was there. It would keep. She picked up the next file on her desk and began to work. April came into Hogwarts through the tall windows of the library, pale and longer than March, and Harry sat at his usual table and did not read the book in front of him. He knew things that sat differently from the things he was used to knowing. His childhood was on the ministry's record. Sirius's case was before a review panel. Dumbledore had been formally censured by the institution he had spent his career defining, and the censure was in the official record in a way that could not be removed. Harry knew all of this, and did not entirely know what to do with the knowing, which was a new kind of problem, the kind that required something other than action, and was probably going to take more than 6 weeks. The year had been different in ways he could not always name. Certain things that would have happened under a different arrangement had not happened here. There was a quality in the castle of something that had been applied with pressure and then lifted. He was getting better at leaving things to settle on their own without examining them too closely first. What the investigation had produced, formally, a Wizengamot finding of welfare neglect. A formal censure attached to Albus Dumbledore's name for maintaining an unauthorized private welfare arrangement without ministry oversight for 14 years. The blood protection was noted as valid and ongoing. It would remain active until Harry's 17th birthday, but had been maintained in conditions the Wizengamot found to constitute neglect, for which magical necessity was an incomplete justification. Harry would not return to Privet Drive during term. His summers would be subject to welfare review. About this, Harry felt something closer to a long-held breath being partially released than to satisfaction or relief. Sirius sat in a small ministry room in late April and waited for the panel to be called in. The room had a table and 3 chairs, which meant 1 for him and 2 for the panel members, and a window that looked onto an internal courtyard. He was not in a cell. He was not restrained. He was here under arrangements made by Amelia Bones, safe passage from a secure location, a private entrance, a schedule that had been coordinated through the same channels Lupin had used in October, and the arrangements were holding. He sat with his hands on the table and looked at the window. He was not yet cleared. The review would take months. Formal Wizengamot proceedings moved at the pace of an institution that saw no reason to accelerate. What had happened today was the first session. The reading of the will, the acknowledgement that a case existed. There would be more sessions. He did not let himself think specifically about the future, because he had learned in Azkaban that specificity about futures you could not control was a mechanism for destroying yourself. For now, he was in a ministry room under his own name, on a legal record, for the first time since November 1981. He heard the door and looked up. Harry came in, the way Harry came into rooms, with the slight wariness of someone who had learned to read a room's temperature before committing to it. He was thin. He was always thin, and Sirius always noticed it, and always tried not to show that he noticed it. The round glasses, the scar at his hairline, pale against the skin. He sat down in one of the empty chairs across from Sirius, and he did not say anything for a moment. "How did it go?" he asked finally. "As expected," Sirius said, "which is not the same as well, but not badly." He looked at Harry. "You didn't have to come." "I know." Harry set his hands on the table, in the same arrangement that Sirius had his, which Sirius noticed and did not comment on. "I wanted to." They sat for a moment with the particular silence of people who have said everything they needed to say on a previous occasion and have not yet found the new thing. "I thought about what you told me," Harry said. "At Grimmauld. About why you didn't take me in." Sirius was very still. "I understand it," Harry said. He said it the way he said difficult things, not looking away, not qualifying it, just putting it in the air where it could be looked at. "I wanted you to know that I understand it. Not that it doesn't—" He stopped. He started again. "I understand it." Sirius looked at this boy who had his mother's eyes and his father's face, and who had sat in a ministry room an hour ago, listening to formal legal proceedings about his own childhood, and he did something with his jaw that was a deliberate substitution for something else. "I should have found a way," Sirius said. He meant, in 1993, with Pettigrew gone. He meant before the war, before any of it. He meant all the specific points on a long timeline, where he had accepted a constraint that he should not have accepted. He had been working through them since August. He expected he would be working through them for a long time. "Yeah," Harry said. He did not say, "It's okay." It was not okay, and they both knew it was not okay, and the word would have been a diminishment of the thing they were actually inside, which was not okay, but was honest, and was, perhaps, the beginning of something that was not okay, but could become something else, given sufficient time. Harry had said, "Yeah, the way you say a word, when you mean something larger than the word," and Sirius heard the larger thing. "I'm still here," Harry said. It was the same thing he had said at Grimmauld in August. He said it now, the way you say something that has become more true on the second saying. Sirius looked at him. "I know," he said. The spring evening came into Amelia's office, through the window she had left open, to let out the smell of old parchment and the particular staleness of a room that had been lived in continuously for months. She sat at her desk, and the investigation's main record was complete, filed, sealed, referenced, entered into the formal DMLE archive in the sequence of proceedings that she had opened on 12th August 1995 and closed, in its primary form, in March. The strongbox was in the lower drawer. She opened the drawer but did not take it out. The note had arrived that afternoon through channels designed to leave no record. It was brief. Certain parties outside the ministry were aware of her investigation into the Dementor deployment of the 2nd August and had expressed interest in her evidence. The source advised her to be careful and was sorry to say so. She read it twice. She held it over the candle on her desk until it caught, and she let it burn down to the tray, and she watched the ash. She opened the strongbox. The sealed folder was inside, exactly where she had put it. The false authorization record, the cross-reference deployment log, her notes in her own hand on the chain of probable command, the date of the minister's private suggestion that she close the matter. She lifted it out and set it on the desk. She was not afraid. She had thought carefully about whether what she was feeling was fear dressed as composure, and she did not think it was. She had seen what the war did, had buried her brother Edgar and his family in 1981, had spent 15 years working in the wake of what Voldemort's forces had left behind, and she knew what fear felt like, and she knew what this felt like, which was something more like clarity. She was a person in possession of evidence. She was going to make sure the evidence survived, regardless of what happened to her. This was not morbidity. This was method. She wrote a note. She addressed the outer envelope to a trusted colleague in the Aura office, a person who had demonstrated, over the preceding months, through small and unremarked actions, that they were the kind of person who acted on evidence rather than on institutional comfort. She placed the sealed Dementor source folder inside a second envelope and sealed it with her personal seal. She placed this inside the note. She wrote on the outside, "If or anything prevents my follow-up, open this." She addressed it. She set it with the outgoing post in a way that would route it through a channel she trusted. Then she put on her outer robes and tidied her desk. She locked the lower drawer out of habit. She picked up her bag. She walked out through the ministry atrium, which was quiet at this hour, the enchanted ceiling showing late evening above the golden fountain. She had walked through this atrium hundreds of times in the course of her career. She did not feel the occasion of it specifically. She felt instead something ordinary and quite solid, that she had done good work today, and had placed what needed to be placed in safekeeping, and would continue doing good work tomorrow. She did not look back at the fountain. She walked toward the exit with her head up, her footsteps even on the polished floor, the evening air waiting at the top of the stairs. The weight she carried was the weight she was actually carrying. She had learned, a long time ago,